Welcome to the Music Mission, where I, Panayiotis Karamanos, along with Enrico Manis, my co-host, are on a mission to explore music. Hello and welcome to the Music Mission. I'm Panayiotis and I'm joined here today with Angus Davison, who I actually don't know who this person is. Well, I do, but not as much as I'd like to, and that's why I'm
on my podcast.
What are you doing on my podcast?
International man of mystery.
Enrico, please explain who this person is.
I met Angus when we were both doing high degrees by research at the con. As I understand it, Angus has finished his master's in composition. So we didn't know each other, but it's a sort of environment where you just sort of meet and you get to know each other's sort of ideas and, I don't know, visions and things quite quickly. I found Angus and still find Angus a really, really interesting composer, not just for how his pieces sound, but his process and how he sort of thinks about it and the kind of things he wants to go for. So Angus, do you want to maybe kick off by talking about your background and what you're about?
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you guys for having me on. Great to be here. Yes, so I'm a composer. I'm originally from Tassie, or that's where I did my undergrad degree. And then I've been in Sydney for 5 or 6 years, came up to do an honours year. And then, as you say, Enrico, I did a master's degree, which is where we know each other. And I have almost finished that. I've technically already got the degree, but I have been asked to make a couple of small revisions to my thesis, as I understand is fairly common practice. So I've got a couple of months to make a few little tweaks and address some examiner comments, and then I will be able to graduate. So I've passed, but I'm not actually technically allowed to say that I have a master's yet. So I'm somewhere in between. Yes, and so pretty much what I do is I mostly compose concert music, orchestras, chamber ensembles, solo players, that sort of thing. And I teach as well. So I teach at the conservatorium, teach a couple of units, and I teach composition privately. And yeah, that pretty much takes up most of my time.
That's really cool. So Angus, what did you do your master's in? So what specifically did you do?
Yeah, so for the sort of master's degree that Enrico and I both did, you need to pick a topic, and then as a composer, you're sort of composing around that topic. And the idea is that you're doing composition as research. So you're trying to demonstrate that you're sort of trying to do something new, I guess. So the topic of my master's was music modelled on natural processes. So, it's pretty much what it says on the tin. It's looking to, processes that sort of underpin how the world around us ticks, and then trying to convert that into music. So into often musical forms, for me. So, for example, I wrote a 3-movement orchestral suite called The Laws of Motion, and each of the 3 movements was sort of modelled on a different one of Newton's 3 laws of motion. There's the law that says that an object will stay in motion unless it's acted upon by an opposing force. So, I sort of have these little battle, I guess, between different parts of the ensemble. One part of the ensemble that kind of wants to get moving, and then another part of the ensemble that kind of comes in and cuts it off or starts it, and those sorts of interplay. So that's what my research was on. It's just basically about taking things that are really interesting and fascinating to me and trying to use those as a starting point for a piece and to share those things I'm interested in.
Cool. So this idea of using natural processes as a model for what you do musically, was that just something you just sort of picked out, or have you always had an interest in that kind of thing, or what's the origin behind that interest?
Well, so a bit of both in that. So like when I was a kid, I was kind of, your original nature kid. My dad's a huge gardener, and at our house in Perth where I grew up, we had this great garden. We had a pond with frogs and chooks and the works and everything. And I always loved just sort of being outside, playing around, looking at insects, digging things, getting dirty, like hunting for gecko eggs in the shed was one of my favorite pastimes. So, a kind of interest in quote unquote nature, which, as I've discovered through writing my thesis, is a very tricky kind of thorny term to define. But I've always had a big interest and love of that. When it comes to combining it with music, actually, that's kind of pretty new for me. Throughout all of my composing, and I sort of started when I was about 10 when I started learning piano. I pretty much always just wrote abstract pieces. I wasn't really interested in linking my music to anything else. And when I'm listening to classical music, I'm most often drawn to abstract music as well. Some aspects of program music can kind of seem a bit silly sometimes, But when I came to do my master's, I decided on this topic because I really wanted to find a way to make my artistic practice kind of just be about more than just, me looking inside my own brain and having kind of insular thoughts, and just try and broaden it out and look out into the world. I was kind of having a bit of a moment of being a bit frustrated with certain elements of contemporary classical music. Sometimes some of the bits of the work that go on there's a lot of navel gazing that goes on from composers, and that's okay. Like there's a place for that for sure, and I do it myself as well. But I didn't want all my work to be looking inwards. I wanted some of it to be looking outwards as well. So I made a conscious choice to branch out into that sort of extra musical area.
So having come to almost the tail end of that master's project, do you feel like taking on that, doing it through that sort of lens is something that's going to stick with you in your future work? Or what kind of influence do you think doing this will have on you as an artist in the long term?
Yeah, I think it will stick to a certain extent. So I've already started a couple of projects since submitting my master's, and for both of those, I've definitely got a really, really strong extra musical element to both of those pieces. One of them is kind of a natural process related topic. One's not. One's actually a present for someone, and there's an extra different topic in there. But I think at this point I've just written enough pieces in a row with that extra musical element that I'm really, really in the swing of that. And I find that it's really, really useful for sort of pushing me to come up with ideas that I might not come up with otherwise. If it's just me just sitting at my piano or my computer or my manuscript paper, you're sort of drawn back to the same sorts of ideas over and over again, even accidentally. But if you've got some extra musical idea as well, that can push you in, slightly different directions that you might not take otherwise. So it's something I think it will stick with me. Who knows? But early signs are promising.
Wow, this is really cool. So Angus, what I want to know is so you said you when you chose to do your master's topic, you thought, okay, I'm going to delve into this topic a lot deeper. So what specifically, I guess, did anything change throughout the process of your master's that you say that, as you researched more and more into this, what did you discover more in your composition? And could you give like a few specifics, maybe to do with how you treat an ensemble, the different textures, different tone colors that work with each other, perhaps?
Yeah. Look, there was a big change over the couple of years. It was a real journey. I think the main thing that I discovered over the course of the degree was I found my way really to this this practice of using natural processes. Where I started was with using natural phenomena, and I know that probably seems like a kind of fairly nitpicky sort of a distinction, but what I mean by that is, like a natural phenomena might be, sort of just like smoke shrouding a mountain or something, which was, behind one of the pieces that I wrote early on in the degree. And, that's great for coming up with an initial texture, coming up with an initial idea, but doesn't actually necessarily give you as a composer much guidance as to what you should then do with that idea, over the course of the piece. Whereas I found that natural processes, so, like, for example, I don't know, to give just a really simple example, the process of evaporation or something, something that everyone is familiar with, that sort of describing the change of something from one state to another over time. And that kind of matches up perfectly with the medium of music, because it's happening over time already. So that was sort of the big discovery over the course of the degree. And I suppose sort of the point of difference between what I'm doing, modelling music off natural processes, compared to just drawing general inspiration from, some vast panoramic vista or the ocean or something. It's quite a lot more specific. So that was probably the big discovery, I think.
Yeah, this is reminding me of, I'm not sure if you've heard of a composer called Viet Quang. He's an American composer. And he's well known in the wind band sphere, and he has a piece called Renewal, which is about the powers of hydro, wind, and solar energies. So it's a nature theme, but it's different. But I guess there's some connection there. And I just remember playing that myself with an ensemble, the North Sydney Symphonic Wind Ensemble, a few years ago under Andrew McQuaid. And that was a premiere in Australia. It was really amazing, the different effects. The one that stuck with me was the solar energies and the use of Harmon mutes actually in the trumpet section, and how we tried to bring about this effect of just the blistering heat in a desert with like that metallic twang you get from Harmon. And I remember wind, we actually all got our instruments and we blew into our instrument. It just blew air into a trumpet. And when you've got 14 trumpeters doing that, you get this really amazing effect that you can't achieve with just normal standard practices. So now I guess this is where my question's leading. Along your journey, have you found that extended techniques or different ways of playing instruments, like as simple as using a mute or playing a trumpet by just blowing into the instrument without getting the buzz, or a flute? We all know that density 24, or is it 21? I can't remember. Have you been drawing on other composers' use of that, inventing your own to represent this change in natural phenomena, like this change in natural process, which I found is actually really cool. The more you're talking about, the more like I'm getting hooked into this.
Yeah, well, so that piece you're talking about sounds great. Short answer, yes, a bit. Longer answer is that in the end, the way I tended to be able to draw the most out of the topic that I was looking into was less about the moment by moment sound, less about trying to, for instance, imitate the sound of wind, and more about form. This is a kind of, possibly a slightly more abstract composery sort of thing to talk about. But I've always found...
Go for it.
Yeah, I'm going to, whether you want me to or not. Form and structure one of the things about music that has always fascinated me the most, and the thing that as a composer I find the most interesting to play with. So what I found really was that these processes were super useful for creating unusual or different forms. I hesitate to say new because just about everything has been done, but forms that are less common. So I guess by way of example, the big project that I wrote to finish my degree was a solo piano piece. It's called Light and Transfiguration. I was really lucky to get amazing Australian piano player Michael Kieran Harvey recorded it for me, which is amazing. And there's a really nice video that he made of it up on YouTube if anyone is interested. But that piece is modelled on the flow of energy through an Earth ecosystem. And it's in 5 movements. So it starts with the sun, where through fusion of hydrogen atoms into helium atoms, there's sort of excess energy that's left over from that process, and that sort of spurts out, and that's what reaches us on the Earth as light and warmth and so on. In that movement, I sort of formally mirror the process of this thermonuclear fusion. So I have 2 hands of the piano sort of starting right at the extremes, really sort of quiet, sort of representing, I suppose, like 2 hydrogen atoms, and they sort of get gradually drawn together into the middle of the piano, and there's this kind of fusion moment where they're just sort of pounding away together in the center of the piano. Then there's this big expulsion of energy. So I didn't so much try to mimic the actual sound of fusion, not least because I have no idea what that sounds like. Very loud, probably, maybe, I don't know. But so more than that, tried to mirror the shape of that process. There were a couple of spots, for instance, a wind band piece that I wrote, which was a response to the bushfires that we had a couple of years ago. Feels so long ago now with all the things that have happened in between. There were some moments in there where I was more directly trying to capture the sounds of, sort of embers that are almost burnt out, or, crackling leaves or so on. So there's some more sort of extended techniques coming into play there with, key clicks on instruments and some air sounds and quite a lot of percussive techniques and things. So those extended techniques certainly came into play a bit, but I'd say overall it wasn't so much about trying to mirror sounds as it was mirroring like shapes over time.
So I feel like we're hitting on some interesting dichotomies here that maybe we'll get into. So there's this thing you've talked about, abstract music and extra musical music, or at least music that takes inspiration from extra musical elements. And you've also talked about this kind of short-term form and individual sounds versus a broader sense of shape and a broader sense of form. Do you feel like you've ended up thinking about taking inspiration from natural processes as an extra musical element? Is that a sort of tool that allows you to access a certain type of form, or a tool that allows you to access maybe particularly interesting kinds of forms for certain types of pieces? Or do you feel like it might be something more fundamental, and that if you are thinking about a larger sense of form when you're writing, it's difficult to escape thinking about natural processes?
Good questions. Yeah, gosh. I mean, I think, look, certainly I think the forms that emerge are very interesting to me personally. I think that, if you have a little piece of material, you can write a piece with that piece of material in sonata form, or you can write it in the form of a decomposing log. and you're going to end up with something completely different. So it is a way of coming up with more interesting overall shapes, at least to me, or at the very least shapes that haven't been done quite as many times. Yeah, everything's been done quite a lot of times, but some things a little bit less. Your second question about, is it maybe something a bit more fundamental? And I think that there is a really deep level. There is something about form in all the arts that is often really reflective of the natural world. A super common example is like the golden ratio, supposedly this perfect way of dividing a stretch of time or space. It's something like 0.61, is it, or something? Anyway, and that's it's something like that, and that's a ratio that
I'm not the right person to ask.
Under 2/3. So
that's a ratio that crops up.
I can
everywhere.
I'm trying to visualize it.
Yeah, the like the spiral shell. Yeah. So you see those examples of the spiral shell, and it's always the golden mean. And then there was that picture of Donald Trump's hair with the the spiral on it as well. So like all perfect things in the world conform to the golden mean, and so much music, whether on purpose or not. You look for the climax of the piece, and it's at the golden mean. I think you're right. There is something fundamental, whether composers try to or not. A lot of what we do mirrors the world around us, probably because there is just something fundamental that just makes certain proportions and shapes just feel right for our brains. It's I guess it's about expanding out past those sort of unintentional, accidental matches with the world around us, and seeing how far that can be taken. Like if it works for the golden mean, how many other things are there out there that you can look at and might actually make for a really great painting or piece of music or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when you brought up sonata form, because there is something I don't know if natural is the right word, or even organic, but even just the idea of maybe something that a more typical form like sonata form and a natural process inspired form would have in common, I guess, is at the end of the day, they just make for interesting stories. Like what you were saying about you sort of tap into maybe these accidental things that just work, and you analyze pieces, and whether or not they did it by design, they just do conform to shapes and progressions that do just work. And sonata form, and they talk about sonata form as just an extension of ternary form, like this basic idea of like you have something and then it undergoes some kind of process of change. So, and I'm thinking of I don't remember, like you have titles of movements in Light and Transfiguration that refer I'm going to butcher this, so you'll have to correct me, but it's something like there's destruction and then rejuvenation. It's neither of those words, but things to that effect.
There's the sun produces,
if
so
you
like
want to correct me.
plants, consumers, animals, things like plants, decomposes. Then last movement is raw materials. So it's like what's left at the end of the cycle.
Yes. Yeah. So a kind of breaking down, and I'm not trying to sort of stuff that idea into sonata form by any means, but there's almost a kind of shared ethos of I guess ideas sort of coming into collision, undergoing some kind of warping or destruction even, and then they return at the end in this, I guess, ideally sort of strengthened or resolved form somehow. And that's just that seems to be a compelling narrative to the listener, irrespective of, and that's not because of sonata form theory. That's just, I don't know, some kind of shared understanding of stories and just basic sort of changes. When you were talking about imitating, not imitating, but tapping into shapes as opposed to imitating sounds. It made me think of, I remember reading a lot of this researcher, I think in Chicago, his name's Zivakovsky, and he talks a lot about analogy and music. And he was talking about programmatic music, I think of Haydn and one of his quartets that takes after a lot of the creation mythology, the creation story. And there's a part in one movement where it's sort of evoking beasts of the land and stuff, and he has the strings do these sort of pouncing, growling motions when they're talking about it's like tigers or something roaming the earth. And there's a bit of the research where he says you listen to it and you sort of say, yeah, it sounds like tigers. Like that's the thing to listen. It's a overtly programmatic. It sounds like tigers, but no, it doesn't. It sounds nothing like tigers. Like tigers don't make that sound in the technical sense, but what it's doing, it's imitating it's evoking the movements of sort of what we understand to be tigers. So that sort of like that energy is sort of coiling up and then springing into action, that sort of ferociousness there, and then once he gives us the program of the creation story, that's suddenly that gives us something meaningful to tap into. Or Flight of the Bumblebee is a similar thing where he says it doesn't sound like a bee, like even though it does, but it sounds like that sort of, it sounds like this sort of movement, which could be a bee, but it could also be called kites in the wind or something like that. So it just made me think that what you were saying about going for the shape that a natural process gives us rather than the sort of the details of the sound of the thing itself, but it's really the shape that is the meaningful thing that your music is sort of able to access and then give to us in sort of a different form. I don't know if you think about that deliberately or want to respond on that, but that it seems to be something like that.
Yeah, look, that makes me think of and I'm going to misremember this, but a quote from the American 20th century composer Morton Feldman, and he said it's something along the lines of, he says that music is about sound in time, and I'm not even sure if it's about sound. His view being that it's all about time, and I come down on his side of that a fair bit. A lot of what I do is about things happening over time, and I suppose there's different kind of attitudes to this. For some composers, it really is about the moment by moment sound and about just like luxuriating in different timbres and things. And I love that as well. But, there are certain things that certain people are better at than others, and, manipulating the finest granular details of timbre is just not something that I feel like I have as natural an aptitude for as, manipulating interesting forms over time and dealing with structure and things. So that tends to be the area that I gravitate to more when I'm composing. Although, like, when I'm listening to pieces, I also really love to listen to pieces that are all about just, sitting back for 40 minutes and just listening to, I don't know, just a B flat for 40 minutes, just gradually change from the flute to the trumpet or something. Yeah, it's an extreme example, but I don't know if that answers what you're getting at. But you put me in mind of the Feldman quote anyway. A lot of things put me in mind of Morton Feldman.
Oh, definitely. Patty, I'm curious about bouncing something off you, actually, because you're not a composer as your primary trade, as far as I know.
No,
but
I
as
just side,
but if you're conducting or rehearsing something, you also have to turn your mind to questions about structure and how you sort of direct your players in I don't know, in the performance that you're thinking of, and coming up with something coherent. Myself, as when I was doing a lot more playing as well as a pianist, you think about in your interpretation, how you sort of I don't know, aid the structure of the piece that is already there by the composer, but also structure it yourself in how you play it and the decisions you make. And I don't know, maybe the lines between those are more blurred than we think. So what does your brain do, Penny, or what are you sort of turning to when you're thinking about structure and performance?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was really interesting, Angus, how you were saying before, like for you, the big thing in music is structure. And, you know, for me, it's the same thing, but I always think about organically fit. I'm not a super fan of going, oh, we're now the A section and the B section and the C section. I don't like compartmentalizing. I like to think of the organic shift from one section to the other. And I guess that can kind of be mirrored in, like, let's say the evaporation example you gave before, where, you know, you don't suddenly have water and then boom, we're in the air. It's a gradual process. And so for me, that's something that I would probably like really enjoy conducting. And you get to feel the transition over time, and you get to tease out specific elements. I mean, an example of something would be the Moldau, right? It's a river, and you're traveling through Czechoslovakia, through the countryside, but there's no real like, we are now at destination A, destination B. It's a really gradual thing, and there's no real, I mean, there are certain markers in the music where that is like, okay, well, here you can say we're at the end of the river, and here you can say we're with the dance of the fairies in that weird section in the center. But it's something that every single time, just through the nature of performance, that kind of changes and shifts every single time you do it. Like what happened in one rehearsal, and then everyone going, oh yeah, I now felt like we did that transition to that new thing. That's where I felt in the music to be. But actually, rather than the performance, we just the synergy in the room, it just gravitated towards this. I feel like there's that bit of element there. So yeah, I hope that answers, I guess, a little bit, Enrico. Angus, what I wanted to ask you is, you like to compose like structure around natural process, and I really loved, Enrico, when you talked about sonata form and just drawing some parallels in there about how it's the ethos of it, just the idea of taking an idea, changing up a bit. What I want to know is, have you ever considered something like the natural process? How am I going to say this? The aging process. So the process of something throughout time, I should say. So like, I think of that example of like what has 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the middle day, and 3 legs at night. That kind of vibe, but stretched out over a long piece. Is there something where you think of like, I know, have you ever thought about representing a person, as they process through life, as an infant, adulthood, and then
That's an interesting idea. Look, I haven't tried to do a complete life as a piece. That feels like a great idea for an opera or a symphony or something, but that might have to wait for a while. But I'm glad you asked that, actually, because I in all this talking about natural processes, it can seem a little mathematical, and really what I like to do the most is when I can find a natural process that has a story attached to it as well. While I haven't represented a person's life, I'm in the process of representing a bird's life at the moment in a piece that I'm writing, a very specific bird. So I'm this year I'm participating in a program that's run by Amiga Ensemble, who's a great ensemble in Sydney. They run a program called Collab Composer Accelerator Program, and this is the first year. I'm writing this piece in 2 movements. It's called Nigel, and it's going to get played at the end of the year, COVID willing. And it's about this bird. It's about a gannet, who I read about 3 years ago. I found this story in the paper about Nigel, and I was really moved by it. So I cut it out and put it in a box and forgot about it. And then when I was moving house earlier in the year, I found the story, and it just happened at the same time as this Amiga project, and it just matched up. And the story goes that there's an island off New Zealand that used to have a big population of seabirds, and in a classic story, when mice or rats were introduced to the island, the population of seabirds was wiped out. So much more recently, a team of well-meaning scientists hatched a plan to try and attract seabirds back to the island. Bit of a harebrained scheme, really. So they installed speakers on the island through which they played recorded gannet calls on loop, and they put statues of birds on the island as well to try and attract real birds back. And it was a total failure. It just didn't work at all, except this one bird.
Oh, no.
This one bird called Nigel came to the island, and Nigel fell in love with one of the stone statues, chose it as his mate, and he just lived there until he died by himself on this island.
I think I've heard of this.
Yeah. He was a bit famous, and it made the papers a few years ago. And I remember. Yeah, I just found it there's an element of comedy to it, I suppose, but also, if you think about it empathetically with Nigel, it's also a really sad story, and it says lots of really, really interesting things about the way that humans meddle in the affairs of other animals, and there's just a lot in it. Mm-hmm. So I tried to base my piece for Amiga around this. So I have a piano which sort of essentially loops like the recorded bird sounds, just kind of loops, unmoving, unchanging, and this clarinet sort of essentially plays the role of Nigel coming in and trying to interact with this immovable kind of stone object of the piano, but it just won't interact, and then the strings kind of, I guess, telling the emotional story underneath. So, that's just a real sweet spot for me, where there's a story that tells you how to develop the music with this repeating piano and this much more lively clarinet line. It tells you how to put the thing together, but it's also got this beautiful story with it. So that's the sweet spot for me, when those things kind of line up.
Nice. And with that story, do you think, I don't know, how do you sort of think of the idea that, do you think it's essential for the listener to know the story of Nigel, and that's what the structure is based on in order to enjoy performance of it? Or do you think that the structure that it has been given by that story has kind of legs on its own right, and can give something compelling that is kind of independent from that story?
Yeah. Well, and look, I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about this as well, actually. I think it's really, really important that pieces stack up on their own merits. And if people don't know what it's about, it still needs to make sense as a piece. And, and I always try and do that. I just like to think that if the piece is good enough that people are interested in it and bother to, read their program notes or look into it, that there is that additional layer there for, if the music has been convincing enough, there's more to get stuck into. But I don't know, as performers, conductors, how you guys feel about performing music with subject matter like that, and how important that story is.
Yeah, I'm very much agreement with that. If the piece really has to really stand on its own, and then for the audience to feel like there is a journey there, and to compel them to want to know more about the piece, and then kind of when they find out it's a bit of an Easter egg sort of, and they go, oh, that's that's what that's about. I mean, like no piece. I mean, you're never really going to hear a piece of music and go, oh yes, that's about Bob the Builder, and he's walking down the road and he's got Scoop and Muck and Dizzy.
Well, unless the song you're listening
I don't
to
know
is the
why that
Bob the
popped into
Builder
my head.
theme, in which case,
unless you listen,
No, in no uncertain terms.
but otherwise,
yeah. But otherwise, like for example, Scheherazade. No one really knows all the 1,000 stories. And people will go into that blind and go, there was a bit of a journey there. There was a story. I felt, that violin that was consistent throughout the whole work, that represents something. Let me find out more. And when they research, they go, wow, that's what that is. And it's a bit of a light bulb moment for them to have a deeper appreciation, which I feel like is the same thing that's going to be with your piece, where, you've got this piano and this clarinet, and the way they're interacting, an audience member will go, there's something, like someone who's just completely oblivious will go, there is something happening here. And when they read the music, they'll be like, oh, like it would just deepen the understanding of it. And they're going, even if they didn't read it, they'd be like, I love this, let me find out more, sort of thing.
That's the hope. But yeah, like as you say, I think the music's got to earn the interest first. So it's a real bugbear of mine when when composers lead about the subject matter of their piece above all else. No one cares what it's about if it just sounds like rubbish. No one cares, and people are perfectly at liberty to not care what some of my pieces are about. That's fair enough. But yeah, it's important for it to be a good piece first and foremost.
Angus, you mentioned people meddling in the natural world in relation to one story. We also brought up the bushfires, which is just one example of how the human impact on the natural world is becoming more and more crucial by the day. Do climate change concerns have an influence in you sort of wanting to go into this area with your composition? Do you anticipate it having more an influence on you going forward?
This is a really thorny one, I think, actually. I am, I'm really hesitant to say that, I wouldn't go out on a limb and say that any piece that I've written so far has had any impact on, global devastating climate change. And there are many composers trying to engage with these themes. And, to be really, really frank, and, I say this as a member of the environmental music team, who is interested in this sort of stuff. I'm really dubious about how much good most of this music actually does when it comes to, raising consciousness of environmental issues. I think most of it does diddly squat. Because, classical music is a niche area, contemporary classical music is a niche area, Australian contemporary classical music is a niche area, Australian contemporary classical music by Angus Davison is super niche. Like, if you're into that, you're like a real hipster, but good on you. So I'm not primarily motivated by, activism. I think if I was, I would need to write different music, to be honest. Like, if I wanted to advocate for causes through my music in a big way, I would really need to make an effort to write music that could reach a broader audience.
Right.
I think possibly a bit of an unpopular opinion, among some of my colleagues. I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think about the ability of music to make a change in these areas? I mean, I think it's possible, right? But I just think that you've got to really prioritize it, and not that many pieces actually make a big impact. We can make lots of small ones.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it is a niche field that we are in, and for a niche field to have a really powerful impact that's super changing, I could probably say it can be within that niche, it can be within that group, like the audience that you reach can have a real impact, right? But if you want it to be spread out, there's only so far, unfortunately. It's just the way society is, that there's only so many people that listen to contemporary classical music, let alone, like you said, like Australian contemporary classical music. And so there are songwriters and pop artists who do that, who try to bring up other topics, and they do reach a wider audience. I think Delta Goodrem wrote a song last year, right after the bushfires, right? About the something about, I just remember the lyrics, "Bring back the rain" or something. And so that was her trying to push across a message to a wider audience. But in our, in this genre, I do think we can have a really powerful impact. Like, a piece that comes to mind is Karajong by Adrian Hallam. Is a piece for wind band. Again, I'm a wind band person, I'm a trumpeter. Which was about the fires in Karajong ages ago. And it much like what we've been talking about, but kind of compressed into 3 minutes. And I guess this could be a topic for after. I guess we've got to wait for Enrico's response. He talks about like he has little sub movements between them in the piece. It's like 10 minutes long, of like the different stages of the fire. And then at the end of that, you think to yourself, golly, and it has a really powerful message, that piece. There's this movement where like I think it's frenzy, like the attack of the fire, and the fleeing of the animals, and like just the changing time signatures and all that stuff. And it was just the accented syncopation. It's just really crazy stuff. Quick question for after Enrico's response to this. We should double it up. Do you tend to prefer longer works to draw out your ideas of natural processes, or shorter works, or in between? That's just a thought for later, but I'm really keen to hear Enrico's thought on what we just said.
Oh, sure. I think both of you have said it. I think just to give maybe a more charitable view on the kind of work you and the kind of work Angus is doing. I mean, I think if you listen to a piece and find something compelling and profound in any aspect of it, and then you connect that with the idea that the piece takes inspiration or has a lot of actually technical influence from natural processes, or even you listen to a piece by Angus and through that you're led to the story of Nigel, and maybe that hits you and that gives you some kind of appreciation for. I think you mentioned activism, which is one thing, but there's also, I think that there's for me, there's a benefit in any product, any kind of artifact or art form that allows one to appreciate the natural world in some form. And Penny, mentioned that piece that is about a particular fire. I think the more stories, the merrier. To be honest, the more stories about different processes, about different beings, about different places, the more sort of different kinds of people and their experiences we might be more likely to hit and just sort of maybe tilt their passions in a direction where they're I don't know, maybe led to care more about the world around us. And then if you have that many small impacts, small ripple effects, then who knows? It's difficult to measure, but for me it can only be a good thing.
Yeah.
And and through some kinds of music, maybe there's things that can only be said in. And so I'm going to steal something I heard from the incredible Michael Kieran Harvey. I hope he doesn't mind me stealing it if he's listening to this. I take no credit for it whatsoever, but he talked about just the idea of time and the agricultural sense of time, and how human society has sort of built its ability to sort of predict and live off the land, off the changing of the seasons, and these predictable patterns that are in jeopardy because of climate change and how that has implications for musicians and how they deal with time and their portrayal of it, and where so much of our music history is interested in cyclical, predictable, neat patterns of time. How that sort of, I don't know, how those changing times are sort of reflected in the new kinds of art we're going to get. And I just feel like being involved with composition and being tapped into natural processes, I just feel like you're not going to get well, I shouldn't say you're not going to get it better, but that's just a ripe field for just getting very interesting takes on that. Even, and it's not to say, even if you don't do that deliberately or write a piece sort of engineered to sort of get that point across to as many people as possible, but if you're writing about natural processes in any aspect of the world that's meaningful to you, if you're being genuine to the source and honoring that process in the way that you have done in your work, that you probably can't stop that coming out somehow, and you probably can't stop that resonating with people, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, long pieces or short pieces?
Well, short. But before I get to that in detail, just to tag on your much more generous take, Enrico. Look, I was actually sitting there through both of your reflections on that, slightly regretting how what I said there came across. I dedicate the best hours of most of my days to writing music that deals with these subjects. I do believe that it's a worthy pursuit, and I live in hope that someone will be moved by the story of Nigel, and that will have a small impact in just spreading wonder and empathy for the natural world. And I don't mean to come across as a terrible cynic. I guess all I was getting at is that in the face of something as vast as climate change, art has a really important role to play. But at the Glasgow Climate Summit, do I hope that all the world leaders down tools and all just write pieces about climate change? Probably not. Be good to get some hard steps done. So it's just I guess for me it's just about making like small contributions, and I recognize that it's small steps, but I think it all matters, as you much more generously and much more articulately put it. Small pieces, long pieces, small pieces. Tell me that there is a piece in the world that's ever existed that isn't too long. They're all too long. Every bit of music's too long. This is another of my ungenerous hot takes, which is, but I'm exaggerating for comic effect. But I think that I'm going to pull some numbers out of the air. I'm going to say I think that 2/3 of pieces could be 10% longer, and they would not be any worse, and they'd probably be a bit better. And very few pieces are too short, in my experience. I almost never listen to a piece and go, oh, that was too short. Wish there was another 3 minutes of that. So I tend to write short pieces. My Light and Transfiguration is 13, 14 minutes long. That's really long for me. And to do that, I had to split it into 5 movements. I'm currently writing a piece for the MSO, which is about 9 minutes in just one movement. And that's about as chunky as I get in one movement generally.
Yeah. I only bring it up because, duration, we are speaking about a journey through time. And I think having a goal of how long you want your piece to be is quite important with what you're trying to convey across. So it's really interesting how for these processes, these natural processes, which could be long processes or short processes, that you've chosen to err on the shorter side rather than say, I'm going to compose a 30-minute, 40-minute piece. So do you find yourself ever trying to subvert the duration of a natural process by making it intentionally the opposite of what you expect it to be? So let's say an explosion, you would draw that out over 30, so it's kind of in slow motion over 30 minutes, whereas something really slow, let's say grass, actually something slow, evaporation, I'm just going to go back to that. Yeah, there we go. Where that happens really quickly. So do you ever intentionally try to subvert those things with that choice?
These are great questions, and I wish we'd had this chat halfway through my master's so I could have thought about and actioned some of these ideas. I haven't consciously thought about subverting the length of a process, no. I just tend to think in terms of, what's the shape of this process and what's an amount of time that I can use to show that in a satisfying way. Yeah, I suppose it's not really about me consciously shortening the pieces. Just my natural mode of expression is fairly short pieces. So I guess it's just those natural processes just kind of fitting into my normal way of doing things. But I'm going to think about it. And maybe I'll do some subverting. It's a good thought.
Cool.
I'll give you a writer credit. You can have 10% of my royalties.
Oh, well done.
1%, please.
Sure.
Angus, where can people find you and what should they be on the lookout for?
Yes. So I have a website. So if you if you just Google Angus Davison composer, all being well, my website should be the top result. And you can find me there, and there's a bio and there's links to my pieces. So I've got some things on YouTube and SoundClouds, but if you go to my website, then there's a nice, neat list of everything, and I've got some recommendations about what people might like to listen to first. And things to look out for. My piece for Amiga Ensemble is in. Hopefully, it's going to be played in December at the Opera House. No idea if people are going to be allowed there, but I'll certainly get a recording, and I'll hopefully have a recording of my piece for the MSO in January. So things to look out for. And if I can also just give a tiny sneaky little plug for my own podcast, which I just started with a good friend of mine, Thomas Misson, composer. So we're starting a podcast where we talk composery things. We'll be doing interviews, composing hacks, some piece analysis videos, and we're going to launch in November. So if I guess I would say probably just, if you follow my various social pages, there'll be details and you can stay tuned for that. Otherwise, just big thank you to you guys for having me on. It was really fun to chat.
No, it was great. I really enjoyed that. So I'll definitely be going to the Amiga Ensemble. I'm a big fan of theirs, actually. I go to quite a few of their concerts. So I'll definitely be going to that. Fantastic. To see that. And thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, guys.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Angus.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye.